The Veltharian Empire had conquered 47 star systems, subjugated 12 sentient species, and mastered faster-than-light travel approximately 3,000 years before humanity figured out that washing hands might prevent disease. Naturally, they considered themselves the apex of galactic civilization, a position they maintained through superior technology, ruthless efficiency, and an absolutely staggering capacity for self-importance. Their latest prisoner was a human named Marcus Reeve, captured during a border skirmish that the Veltharians insisted on calling a police action and everyone else called aggressive expansionism with extra steps. Marcus had the misfortune of being the sole survivor when his cargo vessel wandered into restricted space, though whether this qualified as bad luck or the universe's idea of a practical joke remained to be seen. The Veltharians, being melodramatic even by the standards of species who built their courtrooms with echo chambers, decided that simple execution was too mundane. High Magistrate Zelvorn, whose cranial ridges apparently added +10 to pomposity, decreed that Marcus would face the Trial of Kathros-7, a sentence reserved for the most dangerous criminals, and occasionally for people who interrupted Zelvorn during lunch. Kathros-7 possessed a moon with a forest. Not just any forest, mind you, but the Night Forest, a sprawling jungle of bioluminescent nightmare fuel where even the plants had teeth, and the local fauna viewed visitors as a convenient protein delivery system. The moon's rotation kept this particular hemisphere in perpetual darkness because apparently the universe decided that regular deadly forests were too easy. "The human will perish within hours," Zelvorn announced to the assembled court, his translator unit somehow managing to convey smugness across species barriers. "No being has survived the night forest for more than 2 cycles. This soft-skinned creature will provide the predators with barely a snack." Marcus, standing in magnetic restraints and looking like he desperately needed coffee, raised an eyebrow. "So camping trip?" The translator unit made a confused chirping sound. Veltharian didn't have a word for camping, largely because they considered voluntary exposure to nature a sign of cognitive malfunction. 6 hours later, Marcus found himself dumped unceremoniously in a clearing, wearing only his standard-issue jumpsuit and boots. The transport shuttle disappeared into the purple-black sky, leaving him surrounded by trees that pulsed with eerie blue and green light, creating shadows that moved independently of any logical light source. The air smelled like rotting vegetation mixed with something chemical and vaguely threatening. Somewhere in the distance, something roared, and something else screamed in response. The temperature hovered around 40 degrees, and a light drizzle began falling, because of course it did. Marcus stood motionless for exactly 15 seconds, assessing his situation with the kind of detached analysis that comes from being spectacularly screwed and knowing it. Then he cracked his knuckles, rolled his shoulders, and said to nobody in particular, "Right then, shelter first." Aboard the orbital monitoring station, Junior Observer Krell watched his display screen with the enthusiasm of someone assigned to watch paint dry in real time. His supervisor, Senior Observer Thane, lounged nearby, all 4 of his arms folded in a posture that suggested he'd rather be literally anywhere else. "How long do you think?" Krell asked, mandibles clicking with what might have been curiosity or possibly indigestion. 2 hours, Thane replied. "The Night Stalkers hunt in packs. Once they catch his scent, it's over. Soft species like humans, no natural defenses, no claws, no venom. Honestly, it's almost cruel." On screen, Marcus was gathering branches with systematic efficiency, testing each one for structural integrity before adding it to his growing pile. He worked quickly but without panic, like someone following a mental checklist. What is it doing? Krell leaned closer to his display. Unclear. Perhaps building a funeral pyre for itself. I've heard some species have death rituals. Marcus had, in fact, located a spot where 3 large trees formed a natural triangle, their roots creating a slightly elevated platform. He was now constructing a lean-to shelter using branches, leaves, and a particularly sturdy fallen log. His movements suggested someone who'd done this before, possibly multiple times, possibly for fun like some kind of psychopath. The real trick came with fire. Marcus spent 20 minutes searching for the right materials: dry tinder from dead leaves protected under fallen logs, a straight stick, and a flat piece of wood. Then, because the universe occasionally enjoys proving aliens wrong, he built a bow drill. Supervisor Thane. Krell's voice had risen an octave. The human is it's making fire. With sticks. Thane uncrossed all 4 arms and stared at the screen. Marcus knelt beside his carefully arranged tinder bundle, working the bow drill with steady, practiced strokes. Smoke began to rise. Marcus leaned down, blowing gently, coaxing the ember. A small flame flickered to life. Impossible, Thane whispered. Fire creation requires technology. Plasma igniters, molecular combustion devices. It's using friction, Krell said, his voice strangled. Primitive friction. Like some kind of animal. Marcus, blissfully unaware that he'd just shattered 2 alien worldviews, fed his fire carefully, adding progressively larger sticks. Within 30 minutes, he had a respectable blaze going, positioned strategically at the opening of his shelter. The heat pushed back the cold drizzle. The light created a perimeter that made the pulsing bioluminescence retreat slightly. He settled back against the log, arms crossed, staring into the flames with the expression of someone waiting for a bus. After a moment, he spoke aloud, apparently addressing the forest itself. So here's the thing about humans. We're persistence predators. You know what that means? It means we're not the fastest, not the strongest, not the anythingest really. But we don't quit. Ever. Our ancestors chased antelope until the antelope literally died of exhaustion. We're the horror movie monster that just keeps walking. So whatever you've got out there in the dark, bring it. On the monitoring station, Krell made a sound like a deflating balloon. The night forest, having operated on a simple predator-prey ecosystem for approximately 6 million years, decided to test this strange hairless creature that smelled like potential food but acted like a territorial apex predator. The first night stalker approached around what humans would call 2 a.m., though time was largely theoretical in perpetual darkness. It resembled a panther bred with a scorpion and raised on pure malice, with 6 legs, a segmented tail tipped with paralytic venom, and bioluminescent eyes that glowed an unsettling orange. It crept to the edge of Marcus's firelight, muscles coiled, ready to pounce. Marcus, who'd been dozing lightly with the survival instinct of someone who'd spent time in actually dangerous situations, opened one eye. He assessed the creature for approximately 2 seconds, then grabbed a burning branch from his fire and hurled it directly at the predator's face. The night stalker, which had never encountered prey that fought back with weaponized fire, made an undignified yelping sound and retreated into the darkness at speeds that would have impressed a physicist. "Yeah, that's what I thought," Marcus muttered, feeding another stick into his fire. "Predators are all the same. Big talk until someone throws flaming sticks at your head." He spent the remainder of the night setting up a perimeter of sharpened stakes around his shelter, angled outward at 45 degrees. It wouldn't stop everything, but it would slow things down and make noise. Noise was good. Noise was an early warning system. By dawn, or what passed for dawn in a place where the sun never rose, Marcus had fortified his position, maintained his fire, and gotten approximately 4 hours of sleep in 2-hour intervals. He looked tired, mildly annoyed, and absolutely determined to spite the universe itself. Thane stared at his monitoring equipment like it had personally betrayed him. It survived the first night. Not just survived, Krell said weakly. Thrived. Look at this thermal reading. It maintained optimal body temperature all night. And those defensive structures, Supervisor, this human has tactical knowledge. All species have survival instincts. Not like this. This is methodical. Planned. It's treating a death sentence like a camping trip. Thane finished, remembering Marcus's words. His translator unit still didn't know what camping meant, but context was providing some deeply troubling implications. Marcus spent day 2, still not technically day because of the whole eternal night situation, expanding his operations. He found a stream about 200 meters from his shelter, which meant water. He tested it carefully, letting a small amount sit in a leaf cup for an hour to see if it dissolved the leaf or turned strange colors. When nothing dramatic happened, he drank sparingly. The water tasted like minerals and possibly some algae, but he'd had worse in Nevada. He spent several hours constructing traps. Simple deadfalls using heavy rocks balanced on trigger sticks. Snares made from vines that looked sturdy enough. A particularly clever pit trap disguised with branches and leaves, because Marcus had grown up in the kind of rural area where entertainment meant make elaborate traps for fun. By mid-afternoon, or hour 15, or whatever, he'd caught something. It looked like a rabbit crossed with a lizard, with too many legs and scales that shimmered purple. Marcus regarded it clinically, dispatched it quickly to minimize suffering, and set about field dressing it with a sharp stone he'd spent an hour shaping. "It's eating the wildlife," Krell reported, sounding scandalized. "The toxic wildlife. Those scale rabbits have poisonous glands. Maybe it doesn't know," Thane suggested hopefully. On screen, Marcus carefully removed and discarded several organs, including what were obviously the poison glands, then skewered the meat on a stick and began roasting it over his fire. "It knows," Krell whispered. The meat wasn't bad, Marcus decided. Gamey, a bit tough. But protein was protein. He ate methodically, forced himself to consume every edible bit, because calories were survival, and survival was the entire point. He saved some for later, smoking it over his fire using green wood to generate extra smoke. Day 3, Marcus woke to find his pit trap had caught one of the night stalkers. The creature thrashed and hissed, trying to climb out but unable to get purchase on the smooth sides. Marcus stood at the edge, looking down at the predator that had probably been planning to eat him. The night stalker glared back with luminescent orange eyes full of primal fury. "Yeah, that's rough, buddy," Marcus said conversationally. "But you tried to eat me first, so really, this is on you." He dispatched it quickly with a spear he'd made, a straight branch with a fire-hardened point. The creature would provide materials: hide for better weather protection, sinew for stronger cordage, bones for tools. Marcus set to work with the systematic efficiency of someone who'd watched way too many survival documentaries and actually paid attention. Thane had stopped making predictions. Krell had started taking notes instead of just monitoring, filling reports that were beginning to read less like observation logs and more like technical manuals titled "How One Human Systematically Conquered a Death World." "It's made a drying rack," Krell reported, "for the hide, and it's extracted the venom sac intact. Supervisor, I think it's going to use the venom." "For what?" "Weapon enhancement would be my guess." They watched as Marcus carefully applied venom to several of his spear points, using leaves as makeshift gloves. He tested the coating on a piece of meat, watched it blacken and dissolve, nodded with satisfaction. "Supervisor," Krell said quietly, "what if we made a terrible mistake? We? The Empire, High Magistrate Zelvorn. What if humans aren't a soft species? What if they're something else entirely?" Thane had no answer. On screen, Marcus was building what appeared to be a more permanent structure, using logs and mud, with a proper fire pit lined with stones. He worked steadily, pausing occasionally to check his traps or tend his fire, but always working. By day 5, Marcus had effectively established a homestead. His shelter had walls, a roof, a door made from woven branches. He'd mapped the local area, marking safe paths and dangerous zones using rock cairns. His trapline extended in a 300-meter radius, providing regular food. He'd identified edible plants through careful testing, starting with tiny amounts and waiting for reactions. The local predators had learned that the area around the humans' territory was bad for their health. Several had tried attacking. None had succeeded. 3 had become materials. Marcus, for his part, was starting to get bored. "This is actually not bad," he told the forest, sitting by his fire and eating what was effectively a wilderness stew in a bowl he'd carved from wood. "Bit lonely, sure, weather could be better, but I've stayed in worse apartments in New Chicago. At least here I don't have neighbors who play loud music at 3 a.m. On the monitoring station, Thane made a decision. "We need to inform the High Magistrate that the human survived, that the human is thriving, that we may have just demonstrated to a potentially hostile species that Kathros-7, our allegedly impenetrable death world, is what they consider recreational outdoor activity." The message reached High Magistrate Zelvorn during his afternoon meal, which he immediately regretted because the food turned to ash in his mouth. He watched the compiled footage, Marcus building shelter, making fire, setting traps, crafting tools, domesticating his environment through sheer stubborn refusal to die. "How long has it been?" Zelvorn demanded. "7 cycles, Your Magistracy. The human shows no signs of distress. In fact, our xenopsychologist believes it may be enjoying itself." Zelvorn stared at the screen, watching Marcus add a fish trap to a stream, whistling tunelessly. The human had effectively turned a death sentence into a survival vacation. "Retrieve it," Zelvorn ordered. "Immediately. Your Magistracy, get that human off Kathros-7 before it builds a vacation resort and starts charging admission." The shuttle arrived on day 8. Marcus looked up from where he'd been working on a garden plot, having found some root vegetables that seemed promising for cultivation. The shuttle's landing thrusters scattered ash from his fire pit. The boarding ramp extended. 3 Veltharian guards emerged, weapons ready but held uncertainly. Marcus stood slowly, covered in mud and dried blood, beard growing in scruffy hair wild, looking like humanity's answer to a feral cryptid. He'd fashioned a vest from Night Stalker hide. His spear leaned against his shoulder. His eyes held the calm confidence of someone who'd mastered his environment. "Finally," he said, "I was starting to think you guys forgot about me." The lead guard's translator unit struggled with the casual tone. "You are being retrieved. The trial is concluded." "Oh, bummer. I was planning to build a fish weir next week, and I think I found where the big predators nest. Was going to check that out." The guards exchanged glances, which was impressive given their eye stalks. "You enjoyed this?" one asked. Marcus shrugged. "I mean, it's not a 5-star resort, but once you get the basics down, it's actually kind of peaceful. No traffic, no bills, plenty of fresh air. The whole everything trying to kill you thing gets old, but you adapt." He gathered his few possessions, his best spear, a water skin made from a bladder, a pouch of dried meat. At the last moment, he turned back to his shelter, his fire still burning in its stone-lined pit, his traps set, his garden plot marked out. "Shame to waste all this work," he said. "You guys need a wilderness retreat center, because this would be perfect. Maybe clean up some of the more aggressive wildlife, add some signage. Camp Kathros. Come for the mandatory death sentence, stay for the rustic charm." The guards ushered him onto the shuttle, with the nervous energy of people escorting a tiger they'd mistakenly thought was a house cat. Back at the Veltharian High Court, Marcus stood before Magistrate Zelvorn, who looked like he'd aged several years in 8 days. The courtroom was packed with observers, all wanting to see the human who'd survived the unsurvivable. "You were sentenced to death," Zelvorn said, his voice lacking its previous pomposity. "Yet you survived." "Yeah, about that," Marcus said, scratching his beard. "I've got some notes. Your night forest is actually pretty manageable once you understand the ecosystem. The night stalkers are apex predators, but they're ambush hunters, not pursuit hunters. They give up if you show aggression. The scale rabbits are decent eating if you remove the poison glands. And those blue glowing plants, those are safe to eat. The purple ones will kill you, but the blue ones are fine." Zelvorn stared. "Also," Marcus continued, pulling a small piece of charcoal from his pocket and sketching on the floor. "There's a cave system about 3 kilometers northwest of where you dropped me. Could be mineral deposits there. Might be worth surveying. And the fish in the streams are actually pretty tasty. With some proper equipment, you could probably establish sustainable aquaculture." "You're giving us development suggestions," Zelvorn said faintly, "for our execution facility. Well, seems a waste otherwise. Beautiful moon, really. Terrible for tourism in its current state, but the bones are there." An emergency session of the Veltharian Strategic Council convened that evening. The topic were humans significantly more dangerous than initial intelligence suggested. The head of xenobiology presented findings. Humans were pursuit predators, evolved to outlast prey through sheer endurance. They healed quickly, adapted rapidly, and possessed an apparently limitless capacity for spite-driven achievement. The head of military intelligence showed footage of Marcus building his shelter, setting traps, weaponizing local materials. "They don't just survive hostile environments," she said. "They conquer them, domesticate them, make them home." "One human," someone objected. "One human survived. This doesn't indicate species-wide capability." "One human," military intelligence countered, "treated our most lethal environment as a mild inconvenience. Now multiply that capability across 8 billion individuals." The council chamber fell silent. High Magistrate Zelvorn, his pride thoroughly shattered and his worldview fundamentally restructured, made a pronouncement that would echo through Veltharian history. "The human Marcus Reeve is to be released immediately with full diplomatic honors. Furthermore, Kathros-7 is hereby reclassified from a Class 9 death world to a Class 4 hostile environment, pending review." "Your Magistracy," someone ventured. "What do we classify as Class 9 now?" Zelvorn looked at the image of Marcus on the screen, the human grinning with the satisfied expression of someone who'd won a bet he didn't know he was making. "Earth," Zelvorn said simply. "We classify Earth as Class 9, and we stay very, very far away from it." Marcus Reeve was returned to human space 3 weeks later, along with a formal apology from the Veltharian Empire and a treaty proposal that was extremely generous, suspiciously generous, the kind of generous that suggested they really, really didn't want humans to hold a grudge. When debriefed by human military intelligence, Marcus was asked how he survived. "Honestly," he said, "accepting a coffee that tasted better than anything in the universe." It wasn't that hard. Yeah, the forest was dangerous, but danger is manageable if you're methodical. Humans have been surviving in hostile environments for hundreds of thousands of years. We crossed ice ages, deserts, oceans. We figured out how to live in places that actively tried to kill us, and we did it with stone tools and attitude. So the Veltharians underestimated humans. The Veltharians underestimated what evolution does to a species when survival becomes their primary skill. They built their civilization in easy places, with abundant resources. We built ours in spite of our environment. That's the difference. He took another sip of coffee, savoring it. Also, their death forest has nothing on camping in Alaska. At least on Kathros-7, the mosquitoes don't carry diseases. Somewhere in Veltharian space, High Magistrate Zelvan reviewed reports about human homeworld conditions, temperature extremes ranging from -50 to +50 degrees, weather systems that included rotating columns of destructive wind, tectonic activity that regularly reshaped the surface, and an atmospheric composition that included occasional acid precipitation. Humans called these conditions Tuesday. Zelvan updated his personal files on humanity. Under threat assessment, he typed a single phrase that would become the Empire's official policy regarding Earth and its inhabitants. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Do not assume they are weak because they look soft. They are made of spite, stubbornness, and an evolutionary history that makes our death worlds look like vacation destinations. Recommend maximum diplomatic courtesy and generous trade terms. Also, never invite them camping. The universe, vast and uncaring, continued its rotation. Somewhere on Kathros-7, Marcus's fire still smoldered in its stone-lined pit. His shelter stood empty but functional. His traps remained set. The night forest had gained something it never had before, proof that the universe's most dangerous predator wasn't the one with the biggest claws or the deadliest venom. It was the one stubborn enough to look at certain death and say, "Yeah, but have you considered fire?" And that in the end was the most human thing of all.